We're gonna be running through rule number 7, risk of collision. Oh, let's see. Let's see if I can get this rolling. So we'll roll through just a few intro slides. Alan's probably seen these. Gary, I'm not sure if you've been on for any of mine before, but again, my name is Alan Dennison. I'm the past chair of the National Safe Boating Council. I've got about 35 years of recreational boating experience. I have my OUPV with towing endorsement, and I'm a National Safe Boating Council close quarters and open water boat handling instructor. And I've actually been involved with the NSBC's curriculum for about 10 years now, when we broke the curriculum down into the modular format. So, longtime NSBC board member and just a big fan of the council and everything they do. So we're going to talk about rule number seven, obviously, but we're going to go over just a quick summary of the coal regs, what they are. We're going to roll through the text of rule number 7. So I think it's really important to go through each line of the rule line by line, and then we'll kind of break it down as we go through the rest of the slides. We'll talk about the purpose of rule number 7, what the rule is really about, the rule requirements, and then I have a slide called bearing and range, and those are just two things to keep in mind when you're interacting with other vessels on the water. The use of all available means and what that means. And then important considerations with radar and AIS. And then we're going to run through just a short video that I found that I thought sums things up that's not, too lengthy. It's only about 5 minutes. So we'll jump into slide 1. So what are the coal regs? Again, I'm sure everyone's on this call is familiar with them. The international rules established by the International Maritime Organization, and they're designed to prevent collisions at sea. So that applies to vessels in the high seas and the connected navigable waters. Consists of rules covering conduct, lights, shapes, and signals. And if you have your captain's license, you're obviously very familiar with the coal regs and what they're for. So the text of Rule 7. Let me just see if I can move our little screw. That did not work. Bear with me for 1 second. Hey, Bree, do you mind pausing the recording for 1 second?
Yes, let me see.
Or can you not do that?
I don't think I can, but it's okay. We can clip this. I can have
Okay.
can have
I just tried to hide. Let me see if
it's okay. I can have them fix it.
okay.
It's okay.
That is not the screen I want to share. So I just hit like the collapse thing and I was just trying to collapse the I was trying to collapse the screens, everyone's screens, and it collapsed my collapsed the
Yeah, you
presentation.
can cut that part out. It's no big deal. We can
Okay,
pause it and clip it.
let's see if this works this time. All right, we're back in business. Let's
There we
see.
go.
Okay, cool.
Yep, we got it.
All right, sorry about that, everyone. Text
Okay.
of rule number 7. Every vessel shall use all available means appropriate to the prevailing circumstances and conditions to determine if a risk of collision exists. If there's any doubt, such risk shall be deemed to exist. Proper use shall be made of radar equipment if fitted and operational, including long-range scanning to obtain early warning of risk of collision and radar plotting or equivalent systematic observation of detected objects. C. Assumptions shall not be made on a basis of scanty information, especially scanty radar information. And I think I knew what scanty meant, but I looked it up today just to be sure. So it's basically unreliable or insufficient information. In determining if risk of collision exists, the following considerations shall be among those taken into account. Such risks shall be deemed to exist if the compass bearing of an approaching vessel does not appreciably change. Such risk may sometimes exist when an appreciable bearing change is evident, particularly when approaching a very large vessel or a tow, or when approaching a vessel at close range. All right. Let's bring this back up. Okay, so what's rule number 8 really about? Core principle is you just really want to be using all available means to determine whether a risk of collision exists. And so we'll go over what that means, but that's, using your eyes, using your ears, using your technology on your boat, using your radar, using your AIS. You don't want to rely on a single observation or a single instrument. So you don't want to rely on radar or AIS. You always want to be using your eyes and ears. When in doubt, you're always going to assume risk of collision exists. So the rule number 7 requirements. So every vessel shall use all available means appropriate to the prevailing circumstances and conditions. So, you're in the fog, you're going to be using your radar. You're still going to be using your eyes and ears. You're going to be listening for sound signals when your vision's impeded. So this includes visual observation, like we said, hearing, radar, AIS, and other appropriate information. And you want to be using the same information continuously, not just once. Um, so the NSBC talks about the technique of scan. So you're constantly looking around you, listening, using your technology on your boat at all times. So the key tests for determining if a risk of collision exists is bearing plus range. So a steady bearing with a decreasing range is a classic indication of a collision risk. So you've got a boat that's closing its range on you on the same bearing. You're probably going to have a risk of a collision. And I actually had a situation that happened to me on the water on Friday that we're going to talk about. If the bearing stays nearly the same while the target gets closer, that's, you're taking action. So you're taking an action to avoid a collision, which is, back from rule number 8. A changing bearing does not automatically mean you're safe. So you want to evaluate the whole situation, even if the bearing's changing. Use all available means. So we talked about this already. So visual, sight, relative bearing, lights, shapes, movement. You want to be taking everything into account in that situation as it's going to be dynamic. So you're looking for sound, you're listening for fog signals, other audible signals from the boat. You might be able to hear, in a fog situation, you may be able to hear a bell from the boat. You may be able to hear the machinery on the boat working. You're using all of your senses. Radar, so range, bearing, tracking, CPA and TCPA when available. AIS, so AIS is useful. Not every boat has AIS. It's useful supporting information, but not a substitute for a proper lookout. Navigation, you're using your charts, you're using your chart plotter, your other instruments, traffic information, and you're considering local conditions. So that's everything from weather, current, tides, things like that. So important considerations were for radar and AIS. So if your boat's fitted with radar and it's operational, you want to use it when it's appropriate. You want to make proper use of radar plotting and systematic observation of detected targets. So you're going to use your radar as a tool, but it's not gonna mean that you shouldn't use your other, your eyes and ears and your other tools at your disposal. Do not assume a target is safe just because it's not visually obvious. Radar information must be interpreted in context, so you need to consider things like sea state, clutter, blind sectors, and equipment limitations. AIS is just another supporting piece of technology, not a collision avoidance system. AIS can provide identity, course, speed, and other information, but some of the data may be missing, delayed, incorrect, or unavailable. And like I said, just because the boat's out there doesn't mean that it has AIS or has it turned on. Um, like small craft and other vessels probably don't, in most cases. I mean, it's becoming more common now, but probably in most cases do not transmit an AIS signal. Um, well, and so like we talked about, you're going to use your AIS as a supplement, but never to replace, your visual, your radar, your hearing, and other appropriate observational tools. So practical scenario here. You see a power-driven vessel 30 degrees off your starboard bow. Its relative bearing remains almost constant while the range decreases. Radar confirms the target's closing, so it means it's closing the range on you. And then in this case, we're using AIS. Shows that the target's course and speed, but you should still verify the situation independently. And then, like we talked about a few slides back, the range is decreasing and the bearing staying the same. You need to assume that a risk of collision exists in this scenario. So I had a situation this past weekend, actually Friday evening. I took my family out and we were on the water here in Maryland on the Chesapeake Bay. We were pretty close to Thomas Point Lighthouse, which is a attraction here on the bay that a lot of people come out to check out. And I noticed that a large picnic boat, probably 50 to 60 feet, was on plane off my port bow, probably about a mile and a half off. And I noticed that his bearing was not changing, but his range was closing. So he was headed towards me and the lighthouse. I was in a situation where I was trolling very slowly. My kids were fishing off the back with their Zebcos, and I sort of was, keeping an eye on them while, also keeping an eye on this boat and sort of, keeping an eye on him at a distance. And as his range closed on me, I noticed again that his bearing hadn't changed. So this is when I was in a position where, in order to make an abrupt change, he was up full on plane, was probably traveling, 25 to 30 knots. And for me to make an abrupt turn, I would have turned, would have put me closer to him or put me out in front of him. And so I made the choice to stop the boat and start to back down. Um, he ended up passing me on full plane at about, I'd say, 10 to 15 yards in front of me. And this is $1 million boat that went past me. And I'm in a 23-foot boat. And so I just thought that, you know, it kind of highlights that you can't assume what the other person's doing out there. And so I had probably wrongfully assumed that this person was a experienced mariner and they were coming out to see the lighthouse and they would have given me a wide berth. And basically, I was in a position where I had to, you know, instruct my kids to sit down quickly and plow through 4 foot 4 foot waves. And so I just thought it was kind of pertinent to this rule because I was observing his range and bearing and had assumed he would have given me a berth since he was kind of coming to a point of interest. But he had no problem buzzing my bow basically and waking us significantly. So just thought it was a relative story that happened recently. And one thing I find out as I have gone through my boating life is that you experience all of these things. There in the one way or another, you experience all of these um, situations that the rules are there to address. Um, so I think it's really important to keep them in mind and always try to stay up on them. So to conclude, rather than a summary, I just thought we would run through this video. This is a Refresh Marine. They've done the videos for I think my last two presentations, and I kind of choose them because they're thorough, but they're not overly drawn out and boring. So we'll go ahead and start that. And let me know if you all can't hear it.
Hello and welcome back to Colregs in Depth. Today we're going to be taking a look at Rule 7, Risk of Collision. As always, we're going to look at the rule itself, and then we're going to apply that rule in a couple of different situations. So Rule 7, Risk of Collision. First paragraph. Every vessel shall use all available means appropriate to the prevailing circumstances and conditions to determine if risk of collision exists. If there's any doubt, such risk shall be deemed to exist. Now you'll notice this echoes Rule 5, where we were using all available means to keep a proper lookout. Now we have to use all available means to determine if risk of collision exists. Paragraph B. Proper use shall be made of radar equipment, if fitted and operational, including long-range scanning to obtain early warning of risk of collision, and radar plotting or equivalent systematic observation of detected objects. Now, radar plotting itself I covered in a different video, which I'll link up in the card at the top. But what this paragraph of the rule is saying is we need to use systematic observation. So radar plotting, we're talking about taking a series of plots on the radar. Or visual plotting, we're looking at taking a series of compass bearings. We need to be systematic about it. We can't just look and take one snapshot in time. We need to do it systematically and observe it over a period of time to determine if risk of collision exists. Assumptions shall not be made on the basis of scanty information, especially scanty radar information. This is going back, we need to take systematic observations. So we need to take a series of bearings, a series of radar observations. Scanty information is basically incomplete information. We need the whole picture to determine if risk of collision exists. We cannot make assumptions on scanty information. Then finally, in determining if risk of collision exists, the following considerations shall be among those taken into account. Now, these are just among the considerations. These are not the only ones, but these are among the ones that you need to take into account. Such risk shall be deemed to exist if the compass bearing of an approaching vessel does not appreciably change. What we mean by this is if we put ourselves on the white vessel and we're going to observe the blue vessel, we need to take a bearing of the other vessel. Now we take the bearing as the difference between our heading line and the bearing of the vessel. We need to continue to monitor that as we approach each other. Clearly, in this case, that bearing is not changing. The vessel stays going down that same constant bearing, which means risk of collision exists. But that's not the full picture. Paragraph 2 says that such risk may sometimes exist even when an appreciable bearing change is evident, particularly when approaching a very large vessel or a tow, or when approaching a vessel at close range. What does this look like? Well, if we take the same situation, but let's say we're approaching a significantly larger vessel. Now, to take a bearing of it, we need to pick a part of that vessel that we're taking a bearing of. It's too large to just take a bearing of the whole vessel. So in this case, our bearing is going to be of the bow. Now watch what happens as we approach each other. We're looking down that same bearing line. We're no longer looking at the bow. The bearing of the bow has changed significantly. But that does not mean risk of collision does not exist. If we continue to play the animation, we can see that even though the bearing change was evident, risk of collision still exists. We're approaching a very large vessel. What about a tow? If we go back to the same diagram, but we'll put a tug in front of the vessel. Now we're going to take a bearing of that tug and see what happens when we continue to approach each other. Looking down that same bearing line, we're no longer looking at the tug. The bearing of the tug has changed. But if we continue on, we can see there's still risk of collision. Even though that bearing change is evident, because we're approaching a tow which has a very long length, risk of collision still exists. And that brings us to the end of Rule 7. We've seen how we determine if risk of collision exists. We've seen the importance of systematic observation. We've seen that you cannot make assumptions. And we've seen that if the compass bearing of an approaching vessel doesn't change, risk of collision exists. But we've also seen that in some cases, even if the bearing is changing, risk of collision may still exist. Hopefully you found the information in this video useful. If you have, a thumbs up is always appreciated. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below. And to stay up to date with all my latest videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Until next time, thank you for watching, and goodbye.